Well, Brian, can you tell me a little bit about some of the, I know Wisconsin has a state law concerning yielding to funeral processions, and actually on my show I've asked people to call in, and I actually finally got a call from somebody that had a question. It was probably one of your processions that went down McKee Road to Verona Road, and the person had a question about, you know, can they pass the funeral procession? And I know we're going to talk a little bit about the law, but what are some of the difficulties and that you deal with, especially on the major roads when you're doing a funeral procession from the funeral home here out to the grave site?
A lot of the problems that we're having is that people are just not yielding to the entire funeral procession. The funeral procession will have their hazard lights on, their bright lights on, and they'll have a orange tag in the window or a flag on top of the vehicle. But people are in such a rush, they will cut in between the procession. So what I have learned to do is to just leave my car out there in the middle of the road with the hearse until the light turns red so everyone can see that the funeral procession is coming. But we do understand that, you know, some people have to yield, and or some people will have to get off in the procession, but, you know, they should yield to the procession as though it was their loved one.
Sure. And normally, how long are your processions? Do you find that you have quite a, or does it just kind of vary from service to service as far as the number of cars that have been in a funeral procession? I know I've had family members and friends, and I've been in funeral processions, and some can be, depending on the age of the person, can be short, and others can be very long. So, and I know the length of the ones I'm sure can become very challenging also.
Yes, sir. Some of them will have as long as 20, 30 cars in length. So getting through some of those intersections, some have been very good, especially going up Highway M. They've been very respectful. They'll actually pull over on some of them. But just in some of the the circles, especially the one on M and Junction Road, that has been the problem. And I know it's out of your jurisdiction, Mineral Point Road and Junction Road when we're going to the cemetery out west.
Yeah, I know for our viewers too, that what people are required to do is that I know you instruct probably everybody in the funeral procession. I know you have we have the car here, and you have a flag that goes on top of the people that are in the procession. You get a flag, and then you have them turn their headlights on. And
yeah, I have either a card, it's a placard card, as well as or a flag. So it's either or, because what has happened lately, cars are not made of metal anymore, and the flags will just blow right off the top of the cars. So what we have a flag that actually goes right in the window, the rearview mirror of the vehicle, so as you're approaching it, you can see it says funeral right on top of it, as well as the hazard lights and their bright lights. And I tell them to stay as close, as safe as possible. But I also tell them to possibly take down the license plate number, the description of the vehicle. I actually give them a form to have their passenger fill out of the vehicle that is violating and the location where that has occurred. So. But yeah, we try to put that flag on there so they can actually identify, and by the hazard lights flashing. But the law doesn't state that hazard lights have to be flashing, but it's just a precaution on my standard that every car in my procession has to have their bright lights on and their four-way hazards.
Yeah, I think the statute just says the lights, so you take that extra precaution with the hazards and then the flag. And I know in our Wisconsin statute states that in a funeral procession that the cars line up and they have their headlights on, and then of course you'll probably see a lead vehicle, and then you'll see a hearse, and then usually you probably have a vehicle. Do you have a vehicle at the end of the procession also from the funeral home? Or?
Yes, I try to have one of my white vans, and it will have a funeral yield sign on it as well, and it'll have blinking lights in the back window as a chaser van. It's normally our chaser van.
Okay.
So if people see that chaser van, normally that's the tail end of the procession.
All right, but for our Wisconsin statute, what you have to do is that the funeral procession, you'll have their lights on when they leave, and what they have to do is when they get to a stop light or a stop sign, the lead car will stop, and then if the light is red, if it's green, they can proceed through. What the traffic has to do is they have to yield the right-of-way, so they have to let the whole funeral procession proceed through that intersection before you can proceed yourself. And also, you cannot cut into the middle of a a procession. So I think for a lot of the motorists, what they need to do if they notice a funeral procession is to be extra careful, because you got people driving with different skills and there might be a little bit of gap. And then also, if you're going to need to get over into the lane that the funeral procession's in, be my recommendation, because you don't want to cut into that funeral procession. It's just, if you see it coming, time your distance so that you can fall in behind that funeral procession and then let them proceed. And also, if you see one funeral procession coming, you have to yield. Also, make sure that you stop and then let the funeral procession go through, because I know that's what our Wisconsin statute states, and just like our school bus law, and like Brian mentioned, that if you cut into the middle of that funeral procession, they have the authority to write down your license plate number. They can turn it over to law enforcement, and we will contact you, and they have what they call owner's liability. And if we can't identify the driver, the owner of the vehicle will get a citation for failure to yield to a funeral procession. This also pertains, I know Brian served our country in the United States Army. This also pertains to military convoys, and I know here in Wisconsin, Fort McCoy is just north of here, and if you're driving on the interstate, you'll see military convoys. I don't know if you're ever involved in any of the military convoys. I noticed they also have usually a lead vehicle with either a sign, and they also have their headlights on during the day also, so they're real similar to the funeral procession when you see the military convoy. So the law actually covers both funeral and military processions, but we're just talking today about the funeral processions, and probably a lot of people have probably been involved, and it's kind of a tribute to the person that passed, that you're taking them to their final resting place, and we all need to be very courteous and considerate for the people that are in that funeral procession.